Vyaktyanjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Vishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we continue our discussion on the Dasha Mula Tattva. So in the previous text we discussed first about the energies of Lord Hari, the Paraprakriti, the Maya Shakti, and Jiva Shakti. And then when we discuss the Parashakti, there we discuss the Sandhini, Samvit and the Ladini Shaktis. Now in this Tattva, Bhaktivinoda Thakur focuses on another aspect, that is a further description of the Jiva Shakti. So Sfulingaha Rudhagne Ivachid Anavo Jiva Nichayaha Hare Suryasyaiva Prithag Apitu Tadbheda Vishayaha Vashe Maya Yasya Prakriti Patir Eveshvara Iha Sajiva Muktopi Prakriti Vasha Yogyaha Swagunataha. So here Sfulingo Ruddhagnir. Sfulinga is spark, Agni is a blazing fire. So just as from a blazing fire sparks may fall out, similarly even Chid Anavo Jiva Nichaya. Chid Anavo is the spiritual particles, the spiritual sparks who are the Jivas. The term Jiva Anavo Nichaya, all of them together, Nichaya. Hare Suryas Aiva Aprathak. Hari is like a Surya. Aprathak, just as the sun rays are non-different from the sun, similarly the Jivas are non-different from Hari. Apitu tad bheda vishayaha. But just as the sun rays can leave the sun, and then as they go further and further away from the sun, they may become cooler and they may lose their heat entirely. So like that, there is a difference also. So there is bheda vishayaha. They have a characteristic of being different also. And what is that difference? Vashe Maya Yasya. They can come under Maya. In contrast, Krishna is Prakriti Patir Eveshvara Iha. Prakriti Patir. He is the Lord of Maya. He is Ishvara of Maya. Sajiva Muktopi Prakriti Vasha Yasya Yogya Swagurataha. The Jiva, even if it is liberated, it is vulnerable Prakriti Vasha Yogyataha. It is possible that it can come under Maya because of its constitutional position. Swagunataha. So here, the main theme of this tattva is the relationship between Jiva and Ishvara. Basically, the Upanishads talk about Tattva-traya. Tattva-traya, three truths. What are these two truths? They are called sometimes as an alliteration of Ja. There is Jagdish, Jagat and Jiva. These three are Jagdish, Jagat and Jiva. Now, what is the relationship between these three? That is one of the major points of discussion in the Upanishads, especially the Vedanta Sutra and the commentators' explanation of what the sutras mean. So now, among these, one thing is clear, that the Jagat lacks consciousness. This table is not conscious. We are conscious. Now, if we ask somebody, do you exist? What kind of question are you asking? If to ask such a question, you would say your brain doesn't exist. Obviously, I exist. Yes, even this table exists. But if I ask the table, do you exist? The table does not have the capacity to answer that question. Nowadays, there is artificial intelligence which sometimes may seem to be superseding human intelligence also. It's like the first time when chess playing computers were made, people thought that computers will never be able to play as well as humans. But then there was a computer, Deep Blue, which defeated Gary Kasparov. At that time, it was not just a shock to Gary Kasparov, it was a shock to the human ethos. Now, will in future machines become more intelligent than humans? But we need to know that machines, the way modern computers started, if you look at the history, they basically started with something called abacus. Abacus is basically a device in which you move some beads up and down, and by the moving of the beads up and down, certain calculations are made. Now, no doubt a computer does this with phenomenally greater speed. The speed at which a computer can crunch numbers is mind-boggling. But just as somebody moved the beads of an abacus very fast, we would not think that that produces emotions. We would not think that produces happiness or distress or any kind of experience. Similarly, no matter how phenomenally a machine works, it does not experience any emotions. It does not have consciousness. Now, if we think, we may see movies where we see robots acting as if they have emotions. There are movies like Terminator and things like that. But that is science fiction. It is not science. Why? Because if we think that robots can become conscious and can have emotions, then we need to understand we should just replace the robot with the image of a abacus. Can an abacus have emotions? No. Similarly, just because the number crunching happens faster, that does not mean emotions are going to come. So basic point is, the Jagat, it's clear it's in a different category. It is Achit. Then we have Jiva and Jagdish. What is the relationship between the Jiva and the Jagdish? So the Jagdish is the supreme. Jiva is subordinate. Now there are in the Upanishads statements which go both ways. There are statements which talk about the oneness of the Jiva and the Jagdish, and there are statements which talk about the difference between the two also. So when Shankaracharya wrote his commentary, Shariraka Bhashya, on the Vedanta Sutra, his challenge, as well as the challenge of any Vedantic commentator, is to how to reconcile these two kinds of statements. One kind of statement is that the Jiva and Jagdish are one. The other kind of statement is Jiva and Jagdish are two. So he adopted the strategy of dividing scriptural statements in two categories. One is Mahavakya and the other is Laghu-Vakya. So Mahavakya means very important statements and Laghu-Vakya means less important statements. And he said that the statements in scripture which talk about the oneness of Jiva and Ishvara, they are Mahavakyas. They contain the greater truth. And all the statements in scripture which talk about the worship, the two-ness of the Jiva and Ishvara, the difference of the Jiva and Ishvara, so that the Jiva should worship Ishvara, these are Laghu-Vakya. And in this way, he basically divided scripture broadly into two. And anywhere, any bhakti statement is found, so this is a Laghu-Vakya. And in this way, he reinterpreted the whole Vedic canon so that it would support the Advaitic interpretation. Ramanujacharya, when he came a little later, so at that time, he tore apart Shankara's thesis and the main points he says, where does scripture talk about this Mahavakya and Laghu Vakya? On what basis has been this two-level hermeneutic come up? Hermeneutic is the method of studying or interpreting or understanding scripture. So from where does Shankara got the two-level hermeneutic? And more importantly, he says, if we look at the scripture, majority of the statements are about devotion and worship. The Puranas are filled with worship, with statements about people worshipping the Devatas, worshipping the Supreme. The Upanishads also have statements worshipping the Supreme. So he says, basically by this strategy, more than 90% of scripture is declared as Laghu. So he says, this goes against the integrity of scripture. And then he said, we have to understand scripture in a way that both the statements of oneness and of difference are honored. Both the statements are held to be true. And he gave a particular understanding which is called Vishishtadvaitavad. Now we will not go here into the technicalities of the four systems of Vaishnavism, the four Vaishnava Sampradayas and the technicalities of their philosophy. But suffice it to say here that what Ramanujacharya taught, if we consider a pendulum. Now Shankaracharya took the pendulum towards one extreme. That extreme is of oneness. Everything is one. Jiva and Ishvara are one. Ultimately everything is Advaita. There is no duality ultimately in conclusion. Even Shankara accepted that there is duality in our experience. And Shankaracharya did not reject the worship of the Devatas or even the worship of Vishnu. He said, yes, you should worship till you ultimately realize that you are one with him. But till you come to that, you should worship. So, he incorporated bhakti, but as a means to mukti. So, he basically took the pendulum to the one extreme of Advaitavad. Ramanujacharya brought it to a little balance and said, no, it's not Advaita. Yes, there is, yes, the Jiva and Ishvara are not different, but there is a difference also. And his defining metaphor, Ramanujacharya's defining metaphor was of the body and the soul. He says that the soul remains unchanging, but the body changes. Similarly, for the whole cosmos, with its matter, material and spiritual aspects, they are like the body. And the Ishvara is like the Atma. So the Ishvara remains unchanging, but just as the body changes, similarly the cosmos changes. We discussed in our previous class yesterday about how the challenge was for the Vedantic commentators, how did this world with all its evil come from Brahman, who is supposed to be free from all evil, free from all faults. So he explained that just as the Atma never grows old, but the body grows old. Similarly, the Bhagavan is not affected by any of the qualities of any of the changes of this world, but the world and the living entities in it, they undergo transformations. Then Madhvacharya, he came and took the pendulum to the other extreme. He said, where do you see Ekatva? He talked about Pancham Bheda. He said, if you have this Jagdish, Jiva and Jagat. He said, Jiva and Jagdish are different. Jiva and Jagat are different. Jiva and Jagat are different. Jagat and Jagdish are different. Jiva and Jiva are different. And in Jagat and Jagat also everything is different. Even two snowflakes are not same. So he said there is no Advaitavad. There is Dvaitavad. But there is Pancham Bhed. What are the five differences? There is Jiva and Jagdish are different. Jagat and Jagdish are different. Then Jagat and Jiva are different. There are three differences among the three objects. Then there is Jiva and Jiva are different, and Jagat is also different. The components of Jagat and Jagat are also different. So he took the pendulum to the other extreme, saying that there is only Dvaitavad. So everything is different. And there are the intellectual equivalent of world wars between the Advaitavadis and Dvaitavadis. So when the Dvaitavadis, Madhva followers, they would write a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra which would refute the Advaitic commentators. Then they would put the commentary on two elephants. One elephant would go to Kanchipuram, another elephant would go to Varanasi. And that elephant, they would drop it like dropping a bomb on the enemy camp, they would drop it on the Advaitic commentators. And the Advaitic commentators, Advaitic scholars would all come together and say, how do we refute this now? And they will try to refute this. So the books were also having this very bellicose mood. So for example, the Madhva scholars would write books like called Advaita Kalanala. Kalanal is the fire of destruction. So Advaita Kalanal, the fire of destruction for Advaitavad. And then the Advaitic scholars would also come together and write a book, and they would also put the elephant and send it back to Udupi to drop it on them. And like that, for generations, for centuries, the war went on between the intellectual warfare. So then, when the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya came, so the pendulum went from one extreme, Ramacharya brought it to a middle point somewhere, and then Madhva took it on the other extreme. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and especially after Baldev Vidyabhushan, he brought the balanced state. So actually our philosophy, in terms of institution, we are affiliated with the Madhva Sampradaya. But in terms of doctrine, we are much closer to the Avishishta Advaitavada of Ramacharya, of Sri Vaishnavism. So our understanding is of what? It is Achintyabhedabheda. That yes, there is oneness and there is difference also. So this is talked about. This term as actually never used by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Achintyabhedabheda. The term was first used by Jiva Goswami, and then Jiva Goswami, he used the term to describe Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, and then Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami used it also later. And of course then it has become the standard term for describing our Sampradaya Siddhanta. So what does this mean, Achintyabhedabheda? So the basic tenet that Jiva Goswami holds in his Sandarbhas is that what scripture says is true. So if scripture says that the Jiva and Ishvara are one, that is true. If scripture says that Jiva and Ishvara are different, that is also true. Now how can both happen? So that is Achintya. So the Abhed is also true, the Bhed is also true, and how both can always be true, that is Achintya. So Achintyabhedabheda. Now this Achintya has to be understood very carefully. We will talk about Achintya Tattva a little bit more when we come to it explicitly, but here it is being indirectly referenced to. See, Achintya is not intellectual escapism. Achintya is not that just because we can't understand it, call it Achintya. It is not that, if there is a very serious devotee, or a devotee is supposed to be very advanced, and the devotee sleeps 2 hours during japa, and then he says, my japa 16 rounds is over now. You say, how? If he is sleeping 2 hours, how did he complete the japa? That is Achintya, Prabhu. No, that is not Achintya. That is not Achintya. That is conditioning. Of course, we shouldn't be critical or offensive to senior devotees, but Achintya is not a license for intellectual escapism or intellectual irresponsibility. Achintya essentially means we approach scripture in a mood of reverence. And when scripture makes certain statements that are not understandable by our intelligence, then we submit our intelligence to scripture. It does not mean that any and every illogical thing is to be accepted and called Achintya. First of all, the statements have to be made in scripture. And then also it is not that just because we say something is Achintya, we don't try to understand it. We do try to understand it. Just like we do say that, so one way in which our Acharyas explain is, how is there Achintyabhedabheda? The Abhed is that we are one in quality. The Abhed is that we are one in quality. The Bhed is that we are different in quantity. We are both spiritual, but then Krishna is Vibhu, we are Anu. But then if you say this is a very simplified explanation, that if we go to a deeper level, actually we are not in one quality also. Because we know Krishna has 64 qualities. The Jiva has how many qualities at most?
26.
How many? The Jiva has 50 qualities at the most. Brahma has 50, Shiva has 55, Vishnu has 60, and Krishna has 64. Actually, this is also not true. Because Krishna doesn't have only 64 qualities. Krishna has unlimited qualities. Ananta Guna Sampanna Narayan. That is the beginning definition of the absolute truth given by Ramanujacharya. So within a particular analytical framework which Rupa Goswami uses in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he analyzes Krishna to have 64 qualities. But it is not that Krishna's qualities are limited only to 64. Within that analytical framework, just like we can say that Krishna has 6 opulences. Does that mean he has only 6 opulences? No. Within that analytical framework, the 6 opulences include everything else that we may bring in. But Krishna's opulences are not limited only to 6. There are verses in the Bhagavatam which say that even if one could count all the atoms of the universe, one will not be able to count the qualities of the absolute truth. So, in different analytical frameworks, certain number may be given. So actually in that sense, we are not even qualitatively one with the Supreme. Because in terms of qualities, Krishna has unlimited qualities, whereas we have finite qualities. So when this qualitative oneness is referred to, it is primarily in terms of that Krishna is Satchitananda in composition and the Atma is also Satchitananda in composition. So that is what we refer to as qualities. In quantity, yes, there is a big difference. Krishna is infinite, we are finite. So this is one way to understand it. So Achintya is not intellectual escapism or illogicality. There is illogical, there is logical, and there is translogical. Illogical means something that is so silly that it cannot withstand the scrutiny of logic. Whereas translogical means something that is so lofty that logic cannot stand in front of it. That logic cannot stand in front of it. Why not? Because ultimately, God is the absolute truth. He is beyond everything. Logic is a frame of thinking and connecting things which we have come up with for understanding things in our world. But God is not limited by that. Now to understand God means to recognize that He expands the limit of the possible. That to understand God means to recognize that He expands the limit of the possible. What is possible for us, that is possible for Him, and what is impossible for us, that is also possible for Him. So therefore, when we say that Krishna is doing something that is not illogical, even if it doesn't make logical sense to us, it is translogical. So here one example is given of the how there is Bheda and Aikya. There is oneness and difference, and that is the example of the relationship between the spark and the sun. So spark and the sun both are one in quality. Both are effulgent, but they are different in quantity. The sun if we go near a sun, we will get completely burned. The Ramayana describes how Jatayu and Sampatti, the two vulture brothers, they wanted to fly high into the sky, and they went close to the sky, and they were scorched by it. If we go near a spark, maybe a small part of our skin may be scorched if we touch it. But our whole body won't be scorched. Nobody will burn to death because of a spark. So definitely there is a difference in potency between the two. So there is oneness, but there is difference also. Another important point of difference is that the spark has its sustenance in the sun. The spark would not exist if the sun did not exist. And if the spark is not connected with the sun, the further it goes away from the sun, the spark keeps losing its potency. So now sometimes we say that Krishna is our father. Krishna is our source. This has to be carefully understood, because another place also it is said, Nayam bhutva bhavitavana bhuyaha. In 2.20, Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita that the soul is beginningless. Ajo nitya shashvato yam purano. So if the soul is beginningless, then how can the soul have Krishna as a source? Isn't it? Either one of the two has to be true. If we have a beginning in Krishna, then that means we are not eternal. If we are eternal, then we can't have a beginning in Krishna. Christian theologians have struggled with this paradox a lot. And one of the ways they resolve the paradox is by redefining eternal. Their definition of eternal is forever from the moment of creation. So, creation is not infinity in the backward and forward direction. For them, eternity is only infinity in the forward direction. So it is not infinity, actually it is like semi-infinity, you know. So their definition of eternal is semi-infinite. Their idea is every time a man and a woman unite together, at that time a soul is created. And from that time onward, the soul will go on living eternally. So now this redefinition of eternality has its many problematic implications to it. Not the least being that if that is the time when the soul is created, then why do different souls have such radically different conditions? Now, why is one soul born ugly, another soul born with a beautiful body? Why is one soul born wealthy, why is one soul born in a poor condition? This variety, it just becomes very arbitrary. So there are basically, we talk about transmigration and we talk about reincarnation. That is fine, but within the Christian tradition, they accept the soul. Yesterday I mentioned, does anyone remember? The two ways, the way in which Buddhism goes wrong and the way in which Christianity goes wrong. Christianity accepts soul without reincarnation, and Buddhism accepts a reincarnation without soul. So they both go wrong in two different ways. So now what is the idea? So in Christian conception, there are three things. There is the present life, there is the afterlife, and there is the pre-existence. So they consider pre-existence to be anathema. Anathema means it is a cursed idea. It is a deviation. So they say that is not an acceptable belief. They say there is present life and then there is afterlife. And this afterlife will go on for eternity. So the Vedic understanding is that actually, yes, we are also eternal. But we come from Krishna, or Krishna is our source, not in the sense of chronology. It is in the sense of ontology. Chronology means time sequence. Like we say, a chronometer is a clock. So it's not in terms of chronology. That, okay, at this time Krishna existed but we didn't exist, and then at this time we came into existence. So Krishna is our source not in terms of chronology, but in terms of ontology. Ontology means nature of existence, the study of existence. So our existence is eternally dependent on Krishna. We cannot exist separate from him. And this eternal dependence on Krishna is conveyed through the point that we have our source in Krishna. It is not that the soul has a beginning at any particular time, but the soul's beginningless dependence on Krishna is conveyed through the point that we have he is our source. To give another example to convey this point, one of the favorite metaphors from the Upanishad for the Advaitins is the metaphor of the river merging in the ocean. They say just as a drop of water goes into the ocean, merges into the ocean, similarly the Jiva enters into the Brahman and merges in the Brahman. The Bhagavatam talks about the same metaphor twice, but it talks about it in a different way. Kunti Maharani, when she prays, Tvai me ananya vishaya matir madhupate sakrit ratimudvahata dadha gange vaugamudanvati. So she says, let my consciousness flow towards you just as the Ganga flows towards the ocean. So here the point is, the same metaphor is there, the river going towards the ocean. But when the Vaishnavas understand this metaphor, it is not a merging of beings. It is a meeting of hearts. It is a flow of consciousness that goes on and on forever. It is not that the Jiva and the Bhagavan become, Ishvara become, Jiva and Jagdish don't become one at the time of liberation. Rather, the Jiva's consciousness constantly keeps flowing towards Bhagavan and it doesn't flow anywhere else. So it's a meeting of hearts. It is not a merging of beings. So similarly, just as that is something which goes on and on and on, that our consciousness keeps going towards Krishna, keeps going towards Krishna. In the third canto, Kapila Dev, when he is describing his pure devotees to his mother devotee, also he says the same thing. He says the Ganga flows towards the ocean constantly, my devotee's consciousness always flows towards me. So this is a flow. Similarly, Krishna is our source in the sense of flow. It is not in the sense of a chronological origination. So here the point being made by Bhaktivinoda Thakur is that the jiva is like a spark, and the spark is dependent on the sun for its very existence. Similarly, the jiva is eternally dependent on the Supreme for its existence. And another difference that he gives over here is that he is basically putting in Sanskrit what Chaitanya Charitamrita depicts Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaching in the CC, that Bhagwan is Mayadhish and the jiva is Mayadhin. Mayadhish means he is the lord of Maya. Mayadhin means we are subordinate to Maya. And this is actually the vision that Vyasadeva also has at the start of the Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavatam is a very complex book and it has different seeds. What are the different frames of, what are the different conversational frames in the Bhagavatam? Who is speaking to whom? Sorry?
Sages start with the Naimisharanya.
Yeah, so the meta frame is Suta Goswami speaking to the sages of Naimisharanya. So that is one context of the Bhagavatam. Another is the more famous one, Shukdev Goswami speaking to Parikshit Maharaj. That actually starts from the second canto onwards. The last chapter of the 19th chapter of the first canto, that is when Shukdev Goswami appears and Parikshit Maharaj asks some questions. There are two frames. And Jiva Goswami explains that there is a third frame for the Bhagavatam. And that comes at the start of the 7th chapter. Chapters 4, 5, 6 are the Narad Vyasa Samvad. So Vyasadeva is instructed by Narad Muni, and then Samadhina Anusmara Vicheshtitam. Now Narad Muni tells Vyasadeva, you go into Samadhi and meditate on the wonderful pastimes of the Supreme Lord, and then describe those pastimes. So after that, at the start of the 7th chapter, Vyasadeva goes into meditation. And when he goes into meditation, his vision is described in 5 verses. And Jiva Goswami says, these 5 verses are actually the conceptual seed of the Bhagavatam. There is the contextual seed. Contextual seed means in what context the Bhagavatam spoke. So I gave one class about the structure of the Bhagavatam, talking about the conceptual, chronological and conceptual, chronological and contextual structure of the Bhagavatam. So here the conceptual seed comes over here. What does he say over there? The vision, the first verse he says is that apashyat purusham mayam chitadapashrayam. So apashyat purusham purnam. The first thing he saw is that there is a perfect, the supreme absolute person, mayam chitadapashrayam. Maya is under him. And the next verse he describes is Ya sammohito jivo atmanam trigunatmakam paropi manute anartham tatkrutam cha vipadyate. That jiva, so Krishna is, the Ishvara is above Maya, but the jiva is below Maya. So that is the vision, the enlightened vision that Vyasadeva has. And that same enlightened vision is being depicted here by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Now what is the significance of this? That Krishna is above Maya and we are below Maya. The significance of this is to recognize that Krishna is ultimately transcendental. Just like now, in today's world, there's a huge amount of prestige associated with science. And anything that people ask, what is the scientific proof for this? Is there any scientific proof for this? So just the kind of stronghold or the kind of prestige and hold that science has on people's mind, that was the kind of prestige and hold that in the medieval times Advaitavad had on people's mind in India. So anybody who had to speak, if they spoke anything against Shankaracharya's philosophy, but how could Shankaracharya be wrong? Now how can you go against Shankaracharya? So everything had to be explained in terms of the reference point of Shankaracharya's philosophy, Advaitavad. So now in Advaitavad, God's existence is accepted. But you may have seen some people have that saying on their t-shirt, I was an atheist till I discovered that I was God. So what does it mean? So there are these Advaitins. They say that actually first they have this evolution in the conception of God. They say first you are an atheist, you think there is no God. Then you become a polytheist, that there are many gods. Then you become a theist, there is one God. And then you become a non-dualist, you become Advaitin. There is only God. Their idea is that's the progression. There is only God. Nothing exists except God. But the problem with this idea is that if we think that yes, there is only one God, it is true. There is only, not only one, there is only one, there is only God, that is true. But God has diverse energies. And that does not mean that we are all God. So, in the Advaitic understanding, you can worship God, but ultimately you have to go beyond God also. Because how do you go beyond God? By thinking that, yes, as long as you are conditioned, as long as you are in the lower modes, you cannot think about anybody, something that is impersonal, something that is without form, something that is without qualities. So therefore, you should worship something with form. But when you evolve, at that time you will be able to think of the formless. At that time you can go beyond form. But actually we can never think about the formless. If anything, actually, to put things in a simple way, the only thing in Advaitavad is that there is nothing to think. The only thing to talk is that there is nothing to talk. The only thing to do is that there is nothing to do. So it's actually a very emotionally barren conception. And to make up for that emotional barrenness, they have the idea that you can worship God initially, but eventually you have to transcend God. So their idea is that if this is Brahman, when Brahman comes in contact with, you remember the three tattva which Upanishads talk about? What are the tattvatraya? We discussed their interrelationship, we were discussing in various ways. The three which start from Ja. Jagat, Jaiva, Jagdish, Jagat, Jiva and Jagdish. So now their conception is that the Brahman is completely transcendental. When Brahman comes in contact with Tamoguna, we have Jagat. When Brahman comes in contact with Rajoguna, you have Jiva. When Brahman comes in contact with Sattva-guna, you have Jagdish. But when there is pure Brahman, there is not even Jagdish. There is only Brahman. So their conception is that to come to the level of pure Brahman, you have to go beyond Jagdish also. So initially you can worship Jagdish, but eventually you have to go beyond Jagdish. So this idea that means their conception is even God in his form is actually a product of Maya. And that is why the point that God's form is beyond Maya, that God is Mayadhish, is very important to understand. When you understand that Krishna is beyond Maya, and it is not only he is beyond Maya, that rather he can take us beyond Maya. So Krishna says, Mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tadantite. If you surrender to me, you can go beyond Maya. So just as if we find that, say, a dog is chasing us and we are running away from the dog, we are running away from the dog, we are running away from the dog, and the dog is just running faster and faster, just nipping at our heels, maybe we will bite at any moment. At that time, suddenly, we see some person walking along the road, and then that person looking very nonchalant and calm, and if you come to know, that person is the master of that dog. And then he says, Tommy, stop! And immediately the dog stops. So like that, we can try to run away from Maya, we can try to become free, but there is a limit to how much we can endeavor. But if you can surrender to Jagdish, then he can stop Maya immediately. So that is the faith with which a devotee approaches Krishna. It is not just that we become intelligent enough to see through the illusions. Yes, that is also required. But ultimately, when we surrender to Krishna, it is Krishna who withdraws Maya. Then the agitation stops. Then we become peaceful. Prashant manasam yenam yoginam sukham uppatamam upaiti shantarajasam brahma bhutama kalmasham. 6.27 Krishna says upaiti shantarajasam. Rajoguna becomes pacified. So here Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying that Krishna is Prakriti Pati. He is the master of Prakriti. And by surrendering to him, we too can go beyond Prakriti. So I'll summarize. We started by talking about first how there is these three tattvas, Jagat, Jiva and Jagadish, and the relationship between them is what has been the challenge with the Upanishadic commentators, the Vedantic commentators have had to face. The Upanishads contain especially statements that the Jiva and Jagadish are one and the Jiva and Jagadish are different. So Shankaracharya's Advaitavad tries to reconcile this by saying that the statements which talk about oneness are Mahavakya and the statements which talk about duality are Laghu-Vakya. So Ramanujacharya's challenge to this is twofold. Where is this hermeneutic given in scripture? That there is certain statements in scripture are Mahavakya and some are Laghu-Vakya. And secondly, basically majority of statements talk about bhakti and about worship, about duality in that sense. So we are violating the integrity of the majority of scripture to support a philosophy that can be based at best on a very small fraction of scriptural teachings. So the pendulum which Shankaracharya's Advaitavad takes towards one extreme of Jiva and Jagat are entirely one, Ramanujacharya brings it to a balanced stage of Vishishta Advaita. And then Madhvacharya takes it to the other opposite of Dvaitavad, Pancham Bhed. There is no oneness at all. There is a difference between various things. Jiva and Jagat, Jiva and Jagadish, Jagat and Jagat and Jagadish, Jagat and Jiva, Jiva and Jiva, and Jagat and Jagat. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Achintyabhedabheda brings it back again to the balanced stage. So when we say that the Bheda and Abheda both are there because scripture gives both statements. And how can both be true? That we may not be able to understand. That is why I said Achintya. And then we discuss Achintya is not intellectual irresponsibility or illogicality. It is translogicality based on a reverential approach to scripture and based on an understanding of Krishna's omnipotence. And Achintya also we try to gain some understanding. Like we discussed that we are one in quality, different in quantity. But then this is a simplified understanding. We discussed that we are also different in quality at one level. And we concluded especially by discussing about why is it important to understand that Krishna is beyond Maya. Because impersonalists also accept Krishna's worship, but they say that is as long as you are in Maya, then you can worship, and then beyond that you can go beyond the form of Krishna to merge in Brahman. That is a misunderstanding. And when we understand Krishna's position as the transcendental Lord, then we recognize that by surrendering to him, we too will be able to transcend material existence. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Like Shankaracharya wrote commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and that this verse which you mentioned, like Krishna mentioned, Maya Dakshina Prakati. So in their whole philosophy is like, we can go beyond Maya, even God is product of Maya. So how he comments that? And
okay. The question is that how does Shankaracharya and the Advaitins generally comment on verses where Krishna actually talks about Maya Dakshina Prakriti, I am the Lord of material nature. So there are different strategies they use. One of the basic strategies is that they say that these are statements which are all Laghu-Vakya. They are true, but they are Laghu-Vakya. So within this structure of the universe, certain statements are true. Yes, Krishna is the Lord of Prakriti. But then ultimately you have to go beyond it. And the statement is they say that the scriptures talk about, now I'm not talking about only Shankaracharya's commentary, because many Advaitins have written commentaries and later on also. Some of them say that, yes, the Bhagavad Gita has different parts which are meant to encourage different people. So some sections are for Bhaktas, some sections are for Jnanis, some sections are for Yogis. So if you are like the path of Bhakti, you can focus on those verses. There is a famous yogi who wrote a commentary in the Bhagavad Gita, but he finished his commentary in 6 chapters only. Why? Because he is a yogi and he focuses on Ashtanga Yoga. And his commentary ends not at 6.47, it ends at 6.46. 6.46 is what? Tapasvibhyo adhiko yogi, jnanibhyo pidako mika, karmibhyascha adhiko yogi, tasmad yogi bhava Arjuna. Therefore, jnani yogi is better than a tapasvi, yogi is better than a karmi, yogi is better than a jnani, therefore become a yogi. That is the conclusion of the Gita according to him. So they have that attitude that different sections of the Bhagavad Gita are meant for different people. And Sanskrit also is a language which is open to multiple interpretations. Sometimes they also have this idea that when Krishna is referring to Maya, when he is referring to Mam, they try to interpret in such a way that Krishna is actually not there is the impersonal Brahman who is speaking from within Krishna. And Krishna refers to Mam, he is not referring to himself, he is actually referring to that impersonal Brahman. And so they have various interpretive strategies. But it is difficult to interpret the Bhagavad Gita in that way. And that's one of the interesting things that about the Bhagavad Gita. There is a Western scholar who has taken about 108 commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. He studied all of them together. And he says that actually if you look at the verses of the Bhagavad Gita itself, as well as the verses of the Vedanta Sutra, now they are themselves much more supportive of personalism than impersonalism. So in general, Western commentators who have studied the Bhagavad Gita, most of them have found the Bhagavad Gita to be very a bhakti-centered book. In fact, when Christian theologians came to India, their initial conception was that Hinduism is monistic. And when they read the Bhagavad Gita, they said, this is not a monistic book. This is actually a devotional book, very similar to the way Christians worship the monotheistic God. So they felt that among the Indian literature, the Bhagavad Gita is very close to Christian conception of God and the Christian conception of worshipping God. So basically, the shadow of Shankaracharya's Advaitavad was cast for a long time on Indian translators of the Gita. And that's why they often interpreted Gita in impersonalist ways. But in general, the Gita definitely has impersonal sections. There are verses which do talk about impersonalism. And that is a part of the Gita. But if you look at the overall Gita, the Gita's culmination is in bhakti. And the Gita does talk about the personal manifestation of the Absolute Truth as the highest manifestation. Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
We have some basic idea regarding Shunyavad, Visheshvad and Mayavad. But can you explain the exact difference between all of them?
Okay. So what is the difference between Shunyavad, Nirvisheshavad and Mayavad? Okay. Firstly, let's look at two different categories, Shunyavad and Nirvisheshavad. Shunya literally means void. Zero. Nirvishesha, Vishesha means qualities. Which is actually a very technical philosophical term, and I'll come to that a little later. But let's focus first on, and let's keep the definition simple as qualities. So Shunyavad means the ultimate absolute truth is a void. Now, of course, Buddhist philosophy is also very complex. Because what happens when the Buddhist theologians, Buddhist philosophers, they tried to establish their philosophy and they went into a lot of complexities. Now, the complexity often ends in incoherence. So, their idea of Shunya, they say Shunya is not non-existence. They say the Shunya is the existence beyond existence and non-existence. Now, what does that mean? They say you figure it out. So, it's basically a huge amount of word jugglery. But suffice it to say that they have the conception that we have to give up all desires. In that sense, we have to create a shunya or a vacuum in our consciousness. Now, after that, what happens? There are different Buddhist philosophers who have different ideas about it. So, for example, nirvana is like the extinguishing of a candle. Our consciousness is like a candle, the flame of a candle, and when we extinguish a candle, the illumination goes off. So, like that, our consciousness gets extinguished. But some Buddhist philosophers argue that actually, even if the candle is extinguished, the energy that was there, the energy continues to exist. So, like that, they say consciousness continues to exist at some other level. But essentially, their focus is on that asha hi paramam dukkham nairashya paramam sukham. That desire is the cause of suffering, therefore give up desire and you will become free from suffering. So their idea is that we should give up all desires. So in a simplified sense, our Acharyas explained that Shunya means void. And we just drain our consciousness of all desires, then what remains? They may say something else will emerge, but that is not the mainstream Buddhist understanding. So Shunyavad is basically empty our consciousness of all substance. Not only empty our consciousness of all substance, because for them, they have no conception of a soul as the locus of consciousness. As I said, Buddhists don't have a conception of a soul as the locus or as the source of consciousness. So when you empty all consciousness, what remains? In one sense, nothing remains. So in that sense, it is like a philosophy of nothingness. So Shunyavad is basically we end our existence to end our suffering. But the ending of existence is not a ending of physical existence by committing suicide. It is the end of, they also understand that desires are what cause transmigration. So when we end desires, then our transmigration ends, and in one sense our existence also ends. So Shunyavad is basically end of all existence in a simplified sense. Now, Nirvisheshavad is a term which is used to describe Advaitavad. What Shankaracharya taught was technically called as Advaitavad. Advaitavad, Dvaita is two-ness. Advaita means there is no two-ness. So in English it is all translated as non-dualism. So they accept that duality is there in our present reality. Yes, you are there, I am here. There is a teacher and there is a taught. But in conclusion, we go beyond duality to non-duality. That is Advaitavad. Now, how does this? So, if the absolute truth is ultimately Advaita, then where does the Dvaita come from? Where does the two-ness come from? So there have been multiple schools of thought following Shankaracharya, because when Shankaracharya taught, at that time he taught Advaitavad, but subsequently there were other Vaishnava philosophers who refuted Shankaracharya's philosophy. And actually there are also some Shaivite personalists also. They also refuted Shankaracharya. But the point is Advaita was refuted. So subsequent generations of Advaitins, when they wanted to defend his Advaitavad, they came up with two broad schools of thought. One is, they call it as Pratibimbavad, and the other is Mayavad. So Pratibimbavad, so Advaitavad has two branches, Pratibimbavad and Mayavad. Pratibimbavad is the idea that just as there may be one moon in the sky, but we can see many moons in many puddles or in many pots filled with water. And if the water in the puddles or the water in the pot shakes, then the moon's reflection also gets distorted. So like that, there is only one absolute truth, there is one Brahman, but in the reflection we see many different jivas who think that they are separate. But so this is Pratibimbavad. But Pratibimbavad raises the question, in what is the Pratibimba happening? Isn't it? If Brahman is all that exists, Ekam Brahmaditya Nasti, there is only Brahman that exists, then there has to, if there is a reflection, and even if there is a distorted reflection, there has to be some medium in which reflection is happening. So Pratibimbavad is a little difficult to sustain. So then the other school of thought which came up was called as Mayavad. Mayavad is the idea that the whole conception of two-ness is Maya. The whole conception of duality is Maya. So now in the act of consciousness, there are three things. There is the subject of consciousness. So for example, if I am looking at Digvijay Prabhu, so I am the subject of consciousness. That means I am observing. And there is a stream of consciousness which is going from me to him. And he is the object of my consciousness. So in any act of conscious perception, there is a subject of consciousness, there is a stream of consciousness, and there is the object of consciousness. So Mayavad holds that this entire thing, there is the whole idea of subject of consciousness and object of consciousness. Both are false. So all that exists in reality is simply the stream of consciousness. सो दे से ऐसा ध्यान करना चाहिए कि कौन ध्यान कर रहा है और किसका ध्यान कर रहा है इसका भी ध्यान नहीं रहना चाहिए. Now, in principle, this is true. We also want to become absorbed like that. We also want to become absorbed like that. But there is one thing that we forget, that we are absorbed in something. But that doesn't mean our existence is dissolved. We do exist, but we forget ourselves. That is the meaning of absorption. But absorption of being is not dissolution of being. Absorption of being is not dissolution of being. In fact, even for absorption, there has to be a subject who will get absorbed. Without that, there cannot be absorption. So Mayavad holds that the whole concept of subject and object, both are illusion. So that means the Bhakta is an illusion, Bhagavan is an illusion. There is only the stream of consciousness between the two, that is the reality. This is Mayavad. Now, Nirvisheshavad is a term which the Vaishnavacharyas have used to contrast the concept of Vishay and its absence in Advaitavad. So, Vishesha is something similar to Achintya, which is, Vishesha is a term which is used, as far as I remember, by Vyasatirtha. Vyasatirtha was one of the most prominent acharyas in the Madhva Sampradaya. He used it first to explain Madhva's philosophy. And Baldev Vidyabhushan used it for the first time in our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya in his Govinda Bhashya commentary of the Vedanta Sutra. So, Vishesha means, he says, what is the relationship between an object and its quality? So, for example, fire burns. Now, when I say fire burns, like what Prabhupada explains as dharma. Dharma is an inalienable characteristic of something. Something that makes that thing that thing. So it is the burning capacity that makes fire into fire. So now when we say fire burns, so we cannot have a conception of fire without its burning property. At the same time, fire and burning are two different things. If they are two entirely one thing, then we could just say fire or we could say burns, but it won't make sense. We say fire burns, then it makes proper sense. So burning is a vishesha of fire. Burning is a quality of fire, and the quality is in one sense one and in another sense different. So similarly, what the Vaishnavacharyas explain is that Bhagavan is Sachitananda. At the same time, he has many qualities which are his Vishesha. And those qualities are one and different from him. That is Vishesha. But the Advaitins hold that the absolute truth Brahman is a non-differentiated, homogeneous oneness. So their idea is the absolute truth does not have personality, the absolute truth does not have activities, the absolute truth does not have qualities, the absolute truth does not have relationships, the absolute truth is simply a non-differentiated oneness. So that means their absolute truth does not have Vishesh. That is the conception of these people. So in one sense, so Advaitavad is the original name of the doctrine. Then within the Advaitavad there are two branches. There is Pratibhimbavad and Mayavad. There are many others also, but others did not become so prominent. And among these two, the most prominent has been Mayavad. So generally the Vaishnavacharyas, while referring to it, the whole Advaitavad, they often refer to it as Mayavad itself. And it's not Vaishnavacharyas. Actually, Mayavadis, they themselves refer to themselves as Mayavadis also. So, and that's why the Advaitins, when they refer to themselves, they refer to the opposite of Maya is Tattva. So they call themselves as Tattvavadis. So now, from the philosophical perspective of the Vaishnavas, where the Brahman has Vishesh, so then a name given for that same Advaitavad is Nirvisheshavad. So Advaitavad and Nirvisheshavad are the same, and Mayavad is a subdivision of Nirvisheshavad. So Shunyavad is a different category entirely itself. Shunyavad is non-Vedic, whereas Advaitavad is a misunderstanding of the Vedantic teachings. Is it clear? Okay. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki, Jai Gaur Premanand.